November 1918. The First World War is coming to an end and the German Empire is collapsing. Friedrich Ebert, a socialist, becomes Chancellor of the new Germany. His aim? To avoid civil war. Facing him is a woman, Rosa Luxemburg, also a socialist, who campaigns for radical revolution. She becomes Ebert's worst enemy. When you put it like that, you might think that on the one hand you have an extremist who is prepared to spill blood for the cause of the people, and on the other a statesman who wants to bring peace to his country. But appearances can be deceiving. Poland, 1871. Little Rosa was born into a Jewish bourgeois family. She grew up in the small town of Zamość before moving with her parents to Warsaw, then under Russian rule. Her youth was marked by a medical error that left her disabled. She had a limp her whole life. 1881. Against a backdrop of state-sponsored anti-Semitism throughout the Russian Empire, Rosa Luxemburg witnessed the Warsaw pogrom. She was horrified by the violence. She realized that this brutal and unequal world had to be changed. But how do you do that when you're a young woman, and a Jewish one at that, in an ultra-conservative Russian Empire? She emigrates. So in 1889, Rosa, 18 years old, went to Zurich, Switzerland, alone. She studied political economy. Her reference work was Karl Marx's Capital. In it, she found the theoretical tools that she thought would enable her to transform the world. A theorist and philosopher, she spoke fluent Russian, Polish, German, Yiddish, and French. She lived with a Lithuanian revolutionary activist, but despite this, at the end of the 1890s, she entered into a sham marriage with Gustav Lübeck, a German socialist, in order to move to Berlin. She thought that the revolution would start there, in the German Empire. Rosa Luxemburg quickly established herself in the cosmopolitan circle of Marxist thinkers. She even became one of the leaders of the Workers' International.
Jeder weiß, dass wenigstens für seine Kinder und für seine Enkel an der Befreiung des Volkes mitarbeitet.
She was getting closer to the SPD, the major left-wing party in Germany, but she didn't share all its ideas. Rosa had her own way of seeing the socialist revolution. For her, everything started with the people.
Dass die Gewerkschaften entscheiden und die Massen nicht mehr gefragt werden.
Die Massen haben uns die Stimmen gegeben.
Die Massen haben die Nase voll von eurem Parlamentarismus.
She imagined a peaceful revolution, which hardly convinced the supporters of insurrection. The activist remembered the pogroms of her youth. She didn't want to see bloodshed. She believed that in order to emancipate themselves, people first needed education. Instead of guns, books. Rosa then thought that the revolution must also liberate women. She demanded equality of the sexes and showed off with the great German feminist Clara Zetkin. In a man's world, this kind of talk was disturbing. Finally, she was against all forms of nationalism. For her, the revolution would be global, or it wouldn't be at all. She was gradually becoming one of the main figures of the European left. But she came up against those among the socialists who wanted to use patriotism to seize power. On the right, of course, her political convictions upset the bourgeois and the nobility. She embodied everything the conservatives of the time hated, a woman with a degree who was intelligent and, what's more, a foreigner. In short, she quickly made a lot of enemies. Among them was the German Friedrich Ebert. At the same time, he embodied a completely different current of socialism. He was a moderate. He came from a very modest family in Heidelberg. At a very young age, he was obliged to work, so he couldn't consider advanced studies. He started out as a labourer in a workshop and then as a groom. It was there that he discovered trade unionism. He became an activist and, like Rosa Luxemburg, demanded more social justice. Pragmatic and able to negotiate, Friedrich Ebert joined the SPD. A man of political machinery, he gradually climbed the party's organisation chart and ended up becoming its president in 1913. Ebert was a reformist and, unlike Rosa Luxemburg, he didn't want to hear about revolution.
Ich fürchte, die Massen fordern von mir als dem Parteivorsitzenden die Erfüllung unseres Parteiprogramms.
Yet Ebert and Luxemburg were to campaign side by side in the same party and attend the same demonstrations against their common enemy, the empire and its master, the Kaiser. But that's without taking into account the First World War. July 1914, the logic of alliances plunged almost all of Europe including Germany into an unprecedented conflict. On the 3rd of August, Berlin declared war on Paris. Up until then, the socialists had been pacifists, so they would have to choose sides. For or against the war? That was the question. Rosa Luxemburg was absolutely against the war. The young woman considered the conflict to be against the interests of the working class. She made this clear by publicly criticizing the army. As a result, she found herself in court.
Konnte ich offenbar kein anderes wirksames Mittel im Auge haben als die Aufforderung an die Soldaten, wenn euch befohlen wird zu schießen, schießt nicht.
She was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Friedrich Ebert chose a different path. He opted for the Union Sacrée, sided with the Kaiser and voted for the war credits, taking almost all the socialist MPs with him.
Wir werden Ihnen schon zeigen, dass auch Sozialisten fürs Vaterland zu sterben ist.
For Rosa, Friedrich betrayed the socialist ideal, and he used this as an argument to expel her from the SPD. Rosa spent part of the war in prison. With the support of other revolutionary activists, she closely followed the evolution of the military situation. She was overwhelmed by the hell of the trenches. In reaction, from her cell, Rosa created a new movement, the Spartacist League. Its name was a tribute to the rebellious Roman slave Spartacus. She was supported by dissident socialists, including the intellectual Karl Liebknecht, another great figure of the German left. They hoped that the soldiers revolted by the war would mutiny all over Europe. Their aim? To stop the war and start a social revolution. Except that they were outstripped by the Bolsheviks, who seized power in Russia in October 1917. By immediately withdrawing from the conflict, they seemed to be proving Rosa Luxemburg right. For the young woman who kept up correspondence with Lenin, the world revolution was advancing rapidly. Autumn 1918, the Allies took the offensive. The German army retreated. Whatever they did, the war was lost. The empire would be defeated. The Kaiser was forced to abdicate. The Republic was proclaimed. It's the November Revolution. The political prisoners were released. Among them was a woman ready to fight, Rosa Luxemburg. It was an exciting time for her. After the disaster of the Great War, the time had come to change the model of society. In this atmosphere of excitement, workers' and soldiers' councils were springing up based on the model born in Russia in 1917. They demanded a real sharing of power and wealth. Would the people abolish bourgeois property? At the age of 47, Rosa Luxemburg firmly believed so.
Ich brauchte meine Kräfte zum Überleben. Und für diesen Augenblick veranlassen Sie, dass ich zu meinem Recht komme. Und mein Recht heißt Freiheit!
From the rostrum in the street, the activist became impassioned. The workers listened fervently as she told them of a brighter tomorrow. In the pages of the Spartacist newspaper Die Rote Fahne, the Red Flag, she delivered incendiary indictments against the SPD reformists and their leader, Ebert. She believed that only a genuine democracy born of the working classes and governed by their representatives could bring about the triumph of the social revolution. Many Spartakists felt that the time had come to take up arms. Of course, Friedrich Ebert, who still led the SPD moderates, didn't agree at all. On the 9th of November 1918, this expert in compromise became Chancellor.
Die haben Menschen Größeres geleistet. Auf euch vor allem ruht die Hoffnung der deutschen Freiheit. Ihr seid die stärksten Träger der deutschen Zukunft.
To achieve this, he negotiated a secret agreement with the conservatives and the army. He undertook to restore order in Berlin by force if necessary, a far cry from his socialist ideals. First of all, he had to put an end to the First World War. He began by obtaining an armistice from the Allies, signed in a railway carriage in Rotonde, France on the 11th of November. Ebert proved very useful to the German military high command, none of whom wanted to take responsibility for the defeat.
Wenn nun schon alles zusammenbricht, dann darf sich unsere Partei nicht den Vorwurf aussetzen, in dieser dunklen Stunde unsere Mitwirkung versagt zu haben.
For the Conservatives, the SPD leader had another advantage. Only he could stop the revolution in its tracks, so they let him establish a bourgeois parliamentary republic, the future Weimar Republic. Outraged, Rosa Luxemburg called on Friedrich Ebert to resign. For the other Spartakist leader, Karl Liebknecht, only an armed insurrection would remove him from power. He wanted to rely on the soldiers who were members of the revolutionary councils. The militants, cautious, asked him to wait. She thought that the Spartakists were not sufficiently prepared, but the Berlin workers outflanked the left-wing leaders and on the 5th of January 1919 began to erect barricades in Berlin. Karl Liebknecht called for an insurrectionary general strike. On the 7th of January 1919, 500 million Berliners demonstrated in response to a call from the extreme left. The government's response was brutal. Ebert had seen it coming. He brought troops into the capital, including extreme right-wing militias. They were called the Corps Franc and they were ruthless. From the 8th to the 12th of January, Berlin was a bloodbath. The revolution was crushed without mercy. Hundreds died. On the 15th of January, Rosa Luxemburg was arrested by the military. She was taken away for questioning, but it was actually a trap. The authorities had decided to get rid of her. Stunned with a rifle butt, she was put in a car and shot in the head. Her body was thrown into a canal. The same day, Karl Liebknecht suffered the same fate. It was the end of the Spartakists. The assassination of Rosa Luxemburg caused a huge stir in Germany and abroad. It was a state crime, but the German authorities tried to cover it up. To what extent was Ebert involved in the assassination? We may never know. On the other hand, he continued and even intensified the repression of popular movements. Appointed president by the Weimar National Assembly in 1919, he brutally crushed any attempt at communist insurrection. He was more moderate when it came to repressing extreme right-wing movements. For example, the Munich Putsch in 1923, led by an ultranationalist, Adolf Hitler. Friedrich died on the 28th of February 1925, struck down by peritonitis, slandered by the right, hated by the revolutionary left. He had not succeeded in making the Weimar Republic popular. A century later, the clash of arms has died down. What remains is the legend. Ebert had all the trappings of a traitor. He was blamed for the death of Rosa Luxemburg, but also for the defeat of 1918 and the humiliating Treaty of Versailles signed in 1919. Many historians point out, however, that he succeeded in one thing, preventing the civil war from engulfing the whole of Germany. But after this bloodbath, communists and reformists remained irreconcilable. Their mutual hatred led to the rise of the Nazis and their seizure of power in 1933 with the support of the conservative right. Faced with Friedrich Ebert, Rosa Luxemburg still embodies the dream of a universal and peaceful revolution, led by the people and for the people. From this point of view, the Spartakist insurrection was a disaster, but the dream is still alive.